Here find my fourth, final, and worst part in this strangely long discussion post concerning the contemporary depictions of Final Fantasy VII's Gi tribe and Jenova. At this stage, I have effectively finished all that I needed to say about Final Fantasy VII itself, and am veering off to ask, as always, how can I make this about Xenogears? Or, how can I make this about intertextual conspiracy, really, since I believe that there are imagery sets you can sequence to satisfactorily create a timeline for this shape-shifting invader spanning many millennia across multiple Square Enix-owned gaming franchises? I'm sure we have all said this before, that Jenova is secretly Lavos or something. But I want to explore that sentiment seriously because there was some overlapping imagery put into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And so, off I go. Uncovering Jenova in Cosmo Canyon. Section 4. The Beginning of the End. What do I believe is Jenova's true form or origin point? While expecting an ancient shapeshifter like Jenova to have a genuine, central, true form is likely misguided, there are some recurring physical traits in Jenova's mutations which may hint towards something along those lines. At the very least, she does have patterns. First and foremost, Jenova is female. She presents herself as some abominable cosmic mother. The three known instances we have of a humanoid Jenova from the Hall of Murals, the Shadow Blood Queen, and the Mount Nebel tank are all women. Based on my most up-to-date interpretation of the murals, this pale grey woman may be the appearance that Jenova landed on the planet with. Furthermore, in the original Final Fantasy VII, both of the Jenova monster designs have breasts, and this does carry over to the remake or Mobius series too. The only time we've seen a Jenova not explicitly presenting as female in this regard is Emergent. She might still have a chest, but the lumpy, mutilated texture of this particular form's skin makes it impossible to tell. Another trait with just as much significance is her wings. Though their style varies greatly, Jenova genes consistently cause subjects to develop wings. A hologram of Jenova as the goddess of Guardia from Loveless has two presumably white angel wings. Sephiroth and Genesis have black angel wings, and Jill has white. All three of the Jenova projects are different in wing structure. Krelian, who is Sephiroth's equivalent character in Xenogears, also has two glowing angel wings. Angeal's copies and transformations largely retain his white wing color. Genesis's transformation displays his black wing as well, but his copies begin to display bat-like wings as they grow ever feral. Sephiroth's copies, however, do not and cannot follow this trend, as Sephiroth's genes are impossible to copy. Just, don't think too hard about Kingdom Hearts. It came out way before Crisis Core established that. Sephiroth Reborn has wings growing from his arms and hair. Safer Sephiroth has 6 white angel wings, marred by one grotesque black wing, which itself resembles that seen on Revenant Mother Alyssa. Jenova Dreamweaver, Emergent, and the yet unnamed Revelation version of Jenova Death have these fleshy, hand-like protrusions that may appear as vestigial wings. And Jenova Lifeclinger sprouts 2 proper wings with which she can fly through the ancient capital. The woman we find at Mount Nebel has 2 grotesque, incomplete wings on her back. These also resemble that from the Gi's idol, which I have suggested to be some yet unknown rendition of Jenova. The Blighted Spirit also has vestigial wings that resemble the Gi idol. Some R&D monsters infused with Jenova genes begin growing wings as well, such as Yin and Yang. And I've also given my own theories about the Jenova doll possibly signposting connection with Chaos earlier. That signature tusked skull gets passed down to other creatures experimented on with her genetic matter. Specimen H0512 has the skull exposed below its goopy face. Specimen H1024 seems to have the skull with proper skin on top of it. As suggested in my prior theory, this may have also influenced the creation of Chaos. For what it's worth, however, the mouths on Jenova Emergent and Jenova Lifeclinger almost give the impression of some other monster merely wearing that human skull like a mask at the very front of its giant head. Lifeklinger's long mouth running down its neck honestly gives me a similar vibe to the imprisoned from The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Some kind of, I don't know, giant Shoggoth. Or I suppose it might be of more import to say that it reminds me of Sin. And the snippet we've seen of Jenova Death's incarnation in FF7 Revelation has actually shown Jenova once again losing its head entirely, perhaps because the woman has slunk off and we're setting up for a battle phase against a humanoid Jenova. Numerous Jenova mutations are seen with thin, segmented, insectoid legs protruding from random points on their body, such as the necrotic entities or Gi effigies. Many also have serpentine lower halves alongside this. 1997's Jenova rebirths Soul Flames, Gi effigies, Cetron effigies, and the Panthera Protector, which was likely infected by some small culture of Jenova's virus that the Gi carried to Gaia. All have a large horn in the middle of their head. Notably, the remake Jenova bosses all lack this, as they currently have a large crack in their skull where that horn should be. Only time will tell if it grows in as Jenova steadily regains her strength. Although what we've seen of Revelation thus far has shown the next encounter entirely losing its head. Jenova itself has sprouted numerous of these veiny humanoid arms and hands with sharp nails. The Shadow Blood Queen and Revenant Mother are both depicted with hair or flesh that covers their eyes like a veil. The Blighted Spirit has a distinctive mouth that runs down its chest. This trait and overall body shape resurfaces in some Jenova experiments such as the Diabolic Creation and Diabolic Variant. The Midgar Falls dungeon in Ever Crisis did depict a giant tentacled mass coiling up from within the void or the heart of the planet. The holes in the earth above it are similar to the lifestream wells observed in Bugenhagen's model of Gaia. So maybe this is our first representation of what final stage Jenova would look like after assimilating or replacing a world Sea of Marco. Who knows? Beyond this though, the fact of the matter is that we just don't know anything about Jenova. We don't know what the Thing's native species was. We don't know what Lavos's native species was. We'll likely never know what Jenova's native species was either. She's a cosmic scourge that defies comprehension. The very notion of a native form betrays her concept. Therefore, even Jenova synthesis cannot be considered her true form, despite the battle theme being named Jenova Complete, because Remake and Rebirth now show us that the lifestream is somehow able to affect its own spacetime and fate on a localized, per-planet basis, rather than as an all-encompassing building block of the universe. 1997's FF7 did already show us a discrete night sky with its own moon existing inside of the planet's core, and FF10's far plane exhibits the same. But that idea has been taken so much further now. Even the altar located just below the City of the Ancients seems to hold its own sky. The Temple of the Ancients hides yet another subdimension. The Edge of Creation, Path of Sephiroth, or alternate worlds are all dreams existing within Gaia's own lifestream. Sephiroth wants to absorb a massive amount of spiritual energy from Gaia and become God to rule over Gaia's cycle of souls. So Jenova synthesis is likely operating the same way. That is the most complete form of Jenova as created through Gaia's lifestream, history, and environment. The Jenova idol we see in the village of the Gi looks totally different to any other incarnation. What Jenova itself really truly is, or where specifically it came from, we'll likely never know. Assuming that it can be taken as canon-compliant or still accurate information, the only hint we have to go off are the cards from Mobius Final Fantasy stating that Jenova is an abominable life form fallen from a remote planet. So she, at the very least, should be a genuine alien life form from a corporeal planet, not some conceptual cosmic cancer that manifested from the ether. Anything more than that, though, is perhaps unknowable by design, and it should remain so. Now, it is possible that the Edge of Creation may have hinted to the opposite by having Sephiroth gaze to the ends of the universe and hypothetically observe Jenova being born out of space dust. But I would sooner think that this scene is metaphorical due to his one wing also being represented as a galaxy. Jenova evolved on some harsh planet in the far reaches of space. Beyond that, we've got nothing. So, there you go. That's my pitch for the relationship between Jenova and the Gi tribe. But now, as I sort of hinted at toward the start of the piece, I want to talk intertextual. I would like to make my crazy man collages. I'm looking at properties that have reasonable production ties to Final Fantasy VII or its general sect, like Harvestella with its subconscious depictions, Holy Mother Sophia, pseudo-perpetual motion machine, and undeniable Katamoni imagery was secretly just as much a readaptation of Xenogears as any Xenoblade is, but is not a sister project in the same manner. There's a notable stylistic back and forth between Xenoblade and the FF13 saga. Glowing eyes that foretell the future, sacred red swords, a world without God, the hypermasculine dark magic swordsman, and that enigmatic closing shot of a blue light approaching Earth is actually near identical to the end of 13.3, yet that doesn't really qualify it as a sister project either. Takahashi's first major credits are from Final Fantasy IV and V, whose tale of ancient techno-civilizations and voids clearly left a profound impact on him still felt even into today's Xenoblade series. But those are several orders of separation too far. Monolith Soft has played a supporting role in the 3D Zelda productions for a while now. Their first was Skyward Sword, which can easily be seen to pave the way for Xenoblade 2. The Great Skies presentation is echoed in the Cloud Sea. The male and female sword spirits can be framed as a model for the male and female Aegis and for blades as a whole. Adonis and idea of Somabringer do predate Skyward Sword by several years, but the humanoid weapon idea can be seen to evolve out of Zelda. The Goddess Sword goes through several power-ups to become the Master Sword just like the differing tiers of Monado. Zohar shapes abound throughout the temples of the Triforce, and this particular depiction gives off a greenish gold glow like the conduit or wave. Zelda joins the ranks of Shala, Kid, the Mother of Humanity, Jenova, Lucrezia, Idea, Pyra, Laura, and Gaia in adopting the Katamoni imagery when she seals herself inside of a crystalline cage. And the story, ultimately, is about a pair of lovers destined for reincarnation, much like Faye, Ellie, and their ilk. Zelda and Xeno do have some recurring back and forth. The Golden Wish-granting Triforce was originally conceptualized to be a set of sacred computer chips, much like the Zohar. Skyward Sword's aesthetic very cleanly evolves into Xenoblade 2, as discussed. Meanwhile, Xenoblade X's world design is very clearly the foundation that became Breath of the Wild, and they have that crossover costume from Rex. Instead of a funky laser sword, Xenoblade 3's Sword of the End is more standard and metallic like the Master Sword, also exhibiting a similar capacity for sensing evil presences. Tears of the Kingdom's recall power has a Monado symbol, etc. Yet, the conceptual ties between Zelda and the FF7 Xenogears duology are not nearly as strong, much as I would like to joke about Mithra's kid being Zelda. There is some manner of lineage and aesthetic exchange, but Xenoblade is not a sister project to Zelda like that. It's not just about what we can connect, but what justifiably shares its production space with FF7. The Gi were a people that Jenova invaded, and have also put it into consideration at least that she might be the force which corrupted the heretic mages of Zanarkand. Let's take a step further though, to search for traces of the specimen in Square Enix games that have some kind of logical, conceptual meta ties to the Final Fantasy VII property. Arranged in a timeline as Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Parasite Eve, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, Xenogears, tracking the evolution or the heritage of a single creature and its spawn. Lavos of Chrono Trigger. To begin this timeline, my fun answer to the question of the invader's identity is that Jenova is a fragment of Lavos. It doesn't take much to fold Chrono Trigger into the mix, as it's the stylistic basis on which Final Fantasy VII was built. Lavos is just Jenova on a much larger scale. A DNA harvesting ancient alien which manipulates the governments and revolutionaries of the world throughout 65 million years of history across multiple timelines, steering evolution for its own purposes. Like Jenova, Lavos is an alien with psychic abilities which it uses to influence people's spirits. Its genetic material is also highly mutagenic. Shala is infected by its DNA in order to assimilate her as the Dream Devourer and Time Devourer, and there are other mutants in Chrono Trigger possibly tracing back to Lavos' mutagenic touch. Both entities are immortal, with the Kingdom of Zeal wanting to harness Lavos' power to gain eternal life themselves, reminiscent of how Jenova's mutation had inadvertently made Lucrezia ageless. The root concept for the life stream is found here in Chrono Trigger as well. In order to combat the world parasite, the party locate these circular gates through which they travel back and forward in time. Sephiroth in Rebirth has also shown off similar-looking entry points into alternate world lines. Robo muses that the gates must be the gift of some god, since the 400 years he spent tending to a forest has convinced him of higher purpose. While never clarified in-game, the most thematically likely candidate would be that the entity is the consciousness of the planet itself, and this is confirmed in outside interviews. In which case, the entity can just be described as that planet's life stream, similar to Spirit's Farplane. The FF7 remake series makes the two even more alike, as the life stream is now depicted as having greater influence over spacetime and internal spaces with gates to access the various timelines. Remember when I said that there was an unidentified blue life stream glimpsed just once at the cavern? Well, my off-kilter answer would be that while green is Gaia and red is Terra, we could look at this bluish stream, most likely related to Jenova, and tie it back to Chrono Trigger's blue time gates to further strengthen the idea that Jenova is a Lavos spawn, since Jenova Life Clinger and a Vargad Polis variant called Twin Brain both have some kind of blue internal electricity visible. Suppose that's their own native spirit energy for a second. Chrono Trigger is known to have a kind of planetary consciousness which governs these circular space-time gates, and for all intents and purposes, we could term that a life stream. Though for what it's worth, Chrono Trigger also has red and green gates. Blue is still the predominant colour seen in the common gates or as streams of energy in Chrono Cross. Not only does Chrono Trigger have a life stream, but its humans have spiritual energy, equivalent to the spirit energy of FF7. Lavos and Jenova both are spiritual parasites. So again, if not Lucrezia, Minerva, Shiva or Unalesca, maybe the lady in the tank is Jenova defaulting to the form of Shala since they'd bonded so deeply with the progenitor Lavos. It'd be totally impossible to identify through Akira Toriyama's art style, but it's another fun option nevertheless. At the very least though, I think it's actually not that nonsensical to imagine a world where Lavos splintered off into Sin and Jenova. Granted, from what I remember, Lavos isn't itself shown to have shapeshifter abilities, or at least not of the imposter kind, but it does have several vastly different transformations that we see it adopting. A humanoid, a tree-like form, and a round form, all of which Jenova also has. I even happened to find that Jenova Emergent has an eye in its mouth with little mandibles on the bottom, which kind of gives me Lavos spawn vibes. Lavos itself is hiding what appears to be an eye within the mouth of its shell form. Considering the human eyes on her skull never move, this frame almost looks like the real Jenova is some Lavos-like alien simply wearing a skull as part of its disguise. Lavos has displayed the ability to generate a dark hole over that eye. So too does this Lavos-like eye on Jenova Emergent have that same power. I'm definitely reaching a little too far with this one, but the pattern of Jenova Emergent's eye does resemble the spiny shell of Lavos as it travels through space. Some features from Jenova or its derivatives may combine to form a creature something akin to the Lavos statue in Magus' castle, a giant skeletal humanoid with horns and 4 arms. By absorbing the DNA and spiritual power of life forms, Lavos is able to imitate their powers. Throughout the FF7 Remake series, Jenova is also seen using moves that resemble other enemies. She strikes with an energy imitation of the Masamune, unleashes red and blue flames that heavily resemble Gin Attack, and is able to pass her own void techniques such as teleportation and psychokinesis onto any other beings who have received her cells. Gin Attack, who should be connected to Jenova and whose boss design is loosely similar to Jenova Lifeklinger, has an unexplained red core attached to his body. This one doesn't appear to be a Magnus material like Lifeklinger or the weapons, however. It's an unknown material with strange markings and dangly bits. To me, the appearance of this orb could bring to mind the Frozen Flame, a fragment of Lavos' shell that inspires the events of Chrono Cross. It's even got an indent that looks like the beady little eye. Interpreting it as a face with one Cyclops eye up top, it does also loosely resemble the two inner forms of Lavos. Jenova Lifeklinger herself has some kind of a core in her mouth. When you take the camera into her head, the black half makes it look super in line with the Lavos core. But that part of it is impossible to glimpse with the regular camera and so is likely just something they didn't bother to texture or model. Lifeklinger's concept art shows it extending all the way down its opened neck mouth instead. This feature just didn't make it into the game since Jenova only opens her mouth for like 2 seconds under specific conditions in one phase, and you can barely see it anyway. With how little we know about either entity, I honestly think that there's nothing stopping this suggestion. Chrono Trigger basically has a life stream and it has a planetary parasite. In this big, wide universe, that's enough to go on. Jenova's true form or her native origin story is unknowable with the current information. Final Fantasy VII is written with the intent of hiding Jenova's true nature. For that reason, I think there's nothing wrong with just sticking to your favorite headcanon, which for me is Lavos from Chrono Trigger. My maybe 70% genuine answer is that I reckon because of the immense overlap in imagery, motivation, and abilities, and just the way in which these games were all kind of made in response to each other, in my own headcanon world, Jenova is probably a fragmented growth from Chrono Trigger's Lavos. I'd suggest FF10's Sin is also a product of the same original creature who infects Yu Yevon and Yunalesca to become its avatar. Perhaps Yunalesca and the woman in the tank are both secretly Shala. There's an implication that Jenova might have presided over FF7's mechanical city of Guardia, and if we want to establish contact between her and Spira, then she must have arrived in the era of Machina City Zanarkand. If we tweak her involvement to be a little earlier and suggest that she played some part in the development of these technologically advanced super societies, then it could be used to support the Shala claim by being inspired by a deep-seated longing for her home in the technological capital of Zeal. In fact, that name, Guardia, is of interest, because the Kingdom of Zeal, Shala's home rife with Lavos' virus, does eventually give rise to the Kingdom of Guardia, in which Chrono Trigger is predominantly set. Meanwhile, Shala's brother Janus takes on the name Magus and creates a race known as Fiends. Zeal existed in days of antiquity, meeting its demise in the year 12,000 BC. Dalton, who was an assistant to its queen, detaches himself from the time stream and eventually raises an army to lay siege to Guardia in 1005 AD, wanting to seize the magical blade Masamune. Resulting from this, the sword spirits within are put to slumber and a dark presence descends over the Masamune, possibly due to the influence of Lavos' Frozen Flame. So maybe Jenova's ties to FF7's Guardia and Masamune are instinctual impulses left over from her days as Lavos. Mother Eve of the Third Birthday. The next stop in this journey, I would say, is one planet Earth, as depicted in the Parasite Eve series. So is it possible for Jenova to be connected to the Eve manifestation and neo-mitochondrian creatures in Parasite Eve? Well, not really. Not quite. Not in that duology as they exist under the label of Parasite Eve. See, there's kind of a catch to this. Parasite Eve, as a video game, is a spiritual continuation of a very early concept for FF7 about a detective following a genetic mystery throughout New York City. But much of the specific details in the final game obviously were codified through the decision to license and actualize it as a sequel to the Parasite Eve novel. That's why the game has analogues to FF7 at many turns. For example, Aya Brea just looks like a female version of Cloud Strife. Blonde hair, blue eyes, late 1990s Tetsuya Nomura art style. Professor Clamp experiments on Aya and Maya in 1977, trying to influence their cells to manifest an existence known as Eve. This is like Professor Hojo's human experimentation during the Jenova project, which also began in 1977. The first Parasite Eve features a dog named Shiva, while FF7 Remake made Shiva an important enemy to Jenova. This dog grotesquely mutates into a boss, much like the dog who was the Thing's first host. And the final boss is the ultimate being taking on a shark-like form, chasing you with tense music that reminds me of the Jaws theme. Both those horror films are also known to be key influences on Final Fantasy VII. There are lots of moments where, like Xenogears, it mirrors Final Fantasy VII in design. But Parasite Eve, the game series, is inherently tied to a third-party project and thus cannot be tied to Square Enix's flagship Final Fantasy while in that state. The interesting thing is, though, that they did make a third game loosely following the Parasite Eve model, but disassociating from its key concepts and plot. It is still positioned as a sequel to the events of the prior two games with recurring cast, but it somewhat buries those connections within data logs, and totally disassociates its branding and content from that scene prior. This is an independent reclaiming of the Aya Brea character in a form that could be worked into a theoretical Square Enix crossover. The Third Birthday's interpretation of the FF7 adjacent Parasite Eve content, could that be affixed to Jenova? I think there's enough overlap to entertain the idea, yeah. In fact, the evolution from Parasite Eve to the Third Birthday mimics that scene in Final Fantasy VII and its remake. What began as a more grounded tale, at least in comparison, of a world racked by a DNA-stealing mutant leaped to a much larger scale about cosmic demons, space-time manipulation, alternate universes, and so forth. Original Jenova could be likened to original Eve, and likewise, remake Jenova could be likened to the Twisted. Again, there are some issues in trying to apply Parasite Eve to Final Fantasy VII due to the dubious status of its ownership. But I'm going to brush that licensing hang-up aside for now. The possibility we walk away with when considering the imagery of the Third Birthday in context of Jenova is that perhaps the being known as Jenova came about as consequence of an alternate bad-ending route where Eve and Hyde did fuse, causing the Twisted and the High Ones to give way to a singular interdimensional, psychokinetic, mutagenic, motherly scourge. Let's talk about it. Aliens do exist in Parasite Eve, given that a member of cabinet tells the president, by the time the press gets in, it'll be emptier than Roswell, implying that within Parasite Eve, the Roswell incident was a confirmed UFO retrieval. Using that wiggle room, suppose one such alien or artifact that landed on the planet was a piece of a Lavos spawn's carapace. We do see that the ultimate being forms a spiky, hard carapace during gestation, and once this period finishes, the humanoid creature within emerges, very Lavos-coded. So my fan theory would be that the spawn's mutagen landed on Earth, causing the mitochondrial DNA within humans to awaken and gain sapience as its own errant life form. This sets the events of Parasite Eve in motion. At first, Parasite Eve is a science fiction tale based on the prospect of mitochondrial DNA as a parasite, and specifically the theorized mitochondrial Eve. In the story, this manifests as Maya's mitochondria awakening and entering a mutagenic state. After the girls and their mother are involved in a car accident, Maya's kidney cells are transplanted to a lady named Melissa, who is tricked into taking medicine that progressively awakens her mitochondrial DNA until it becomes a legitimate parasitic consciousness of its own. In essence, a body snatcher. Now naming herself Eve, she gains the capability to mutate her own body or to send signals to the mitochondria of those in her proximity, either having them expend their full energy at once, causing spontaneous human combustion, or transforming them into neo-mitochondrial creatures as well. These new monsters are capable of shape-shifting back into a human appearance to lure in their victims. At this stage, the monsters are generally fire type because the game is about spontaneous combustion. Although, interestingly, Eve does shoot green beams, and there are spirit particles floating around when she or Aya use their mitochondrial magic. Across the trilogy, Eve is presented as some kind of evil, mutant mother, much like Jenova. The first game's story becomes about Dr. Clamp supplying Eve with modified sperm that has no human mitochondria in it so that she can give birth to a purebred mitochondrian life form known as the Ultimate Being. Whereas Eve in the third birthday, who is a totally distinct entity to the Eve from the first game, is referred to as the Mother by the High Ones. Aya was also treated with some of Maya's cells, but since they're family, she managed to accept it better than Melissa did. She retains her sanity and gains immunity to Eve's psychic combustions, while also gaining the capacity to psychically control the mitochondria of others in the same manner. Though she does still possess something of a reunion instinct, as her mitochondria drew her to attend the opera where Eve awoke, despite not really knowing why it interested her. The unique genetic makeup that Aya's mitochondria provide have left her immortal, much like Jenova's DNA does. Aya also displays the ability to freely customize her own genetic code by absorbing or expelling DNA cores. This calls to mind Jenova's DNA being described as a two-way genetic conduit. A member of the team muses that her body is learning to select ideal genes for self-evolution, which is much like what Lavos is known to do. The DNA cores appear as coloured orbs, similar to materia or spheres. When she equips them, a life stream-like bioelectricity appears in the background. Much like Jenova, wings are found in numerous of Eve's mutants. Aya, for example, has blue skin and 2 angel wings when activating her own liberation form, and the Ultimate Being also has 2 angel wings. Though a different type of entity, Gabrielle's twisted form is also described as having the wings of a fallen angel. Interestingly, the Ultimate Being's third stage also has a dual torso like the Panthera Protector. Like Aya's mitochondrial form, Maya's mutation encountered at the Chrysler Building also resembles a Markonoid creature or 1997 Jenova itself. Eve's aria throughout the original Parasite Eve reminds me of a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth track tentatively titled The Age of the Cetra. Additionally, Aya's theme reminds me of the Shadow Blood Queens. Horror ambience in Parasite Eve 2's first building also brings to mind the Shadow Blood Queen's distorted atmosphere. So in this way, with the aliens, the mutations, and the mother, if we want to fuse FF7 and Parasite Eve into a single shared universe, then there is obviously a conversation happening between Eve and Jenova. But what is the actual sequence? While Parasite Eve does not directly make allusion to a life stream, Fireflies, or any immediately declared counterpart, we can find the third birthday occasionally mentioning life force as a real known substance that Aya uses in conjunction with the parasite energy or over energy to power her magic spells. For example, the Inferno attack uses Aya's life force to wipe out the surrounding enemies, or Impact Wave releases life energy. Life force could be the equivalent spirit energy that we're searching for. Earlier in the script, I suggested that Animus and Anima may simply be different life stream polarities found throughout the universe. The third birthday's Earth would be one example where Animus is the planet's native element. When humans are being erased from the time stream, they're shown vanishing into red particles. This predominantly also applies to the Twisted, which are revealed to have been created from the essence of Aya's soul being splintered across space-time. Interestingly though, the High Ones, which arose from Eve's body after death, have distinct green energy akin to Anima. There are two main enemy factions in the third birthday. The Twisted are Jenova-like cosmic entities, described as mysterious life forms and a virus that devours time and space. They teleport, they mutate. By attacking humans with what they call descent attacks, Queens and Mudflaps can transform their victims into more Twisted. Descent appears to be the name for the black ooze they utilize, which makes me think about Jenova Dreamweaver's black acid. Might we liken this to them being delivered a dose of mutagen? Jenova Lifeclinger, which I briefly compared to Lavos and which I will compare to Sin, also has the imagery present to strengthen a connection to the third birthday. The eyes found throughout her chamber are near identical in design to the orbs grown by the Babel, and Hyde's inner world also has random vertebrae floating about. Babels are giant tentacle-like structures that serve as nests for the Twisted, which abruptly emerged from wormholes. Way back, I mentioned that I don't think the odd structure that emerges when Sephiroth retrieves the black materia from its pocket dimension is related to Jenova, but with this new framing in place, the phenomena does resemble the Babels. The Twisted are a phenomena that resulted from Aya's parasite energy-infused soul being shattered and sent through spacetime. My suggestion is that maybe the essences of the Twisted and High Ones were combined inside of Eve, the mother, to create Jenova. But Aya's soul, a key component of the Twisted, might remain fragmented. In which case, it calls to mind how Sephiroth in Rebirth alludes to his mother being fragmented across dimensions, wanting to put her back together. He also speaks of his dominion reaching into an everlasting world, while the third birthday's characters cryptically refer to eternity existing inside of Eve. When Hyde is coaxing Eve to fuse with them, he refers to their new existence as a dream. Many of Remake Jenova's abilities are a kind of dream overlaid onto physical space, and this is also something which I use to implicate a link to FF10's Sin. The terminology appearing in the third birthday could strengthen the connection between all three. Despite the Twisted all finding root in Aya's soul fragments, Maida's research reveals that they aren't monophyletic, not existing under a single clade despite appearing as a united species. This could be indicative of them assimilating species from many different planets, much like Jenova. When humans are mutated into Twisted, an orb of darkness covers their bodies to induce the transformation. This could be likened to how demonic entities transform through a fog, while Vincent transforms via a similar orb. Hyde's mutant form resembles that of a Jenova distortion. The Twisted generally have blue skin, like some of the Marconoids. Queens inside the core of the Babel have a large mouth at the top that resembles the blighted spirit and diabolic creation. This interior space where the Queen exists is described as a world where the future mingles freely with the present. The Lifestream has obtained this attribute as of late. As they fade away, enemies in the third birthday have red and white blood float into the air and often give off these odd bubbles. Much like the minute visual differences and mechanics between Fireflies on Spira and Lifestream Wisps on Gaia, maybe Earth's spirit energy again manifests in a minorly changed way despite being the same underlying principle. For consideration, the Genesis copy who ingested S cells is also shown with orange bubbles. These red orbs and some red flames also radiate off Aya when she activates her liberation mode. Reapers are also shown being able to revert to a red orb similar to some kind of Gi Firefly, then manifest again with an iridescent halo that resembles FF10's Fiends. Rovers first appear as a red light before manifesting. Intel describes this as its shadow while the body resides in an alternate universe. It then proceeds to attack with dark purple energy. We could equate this to Jenova's red spirit energy and purple void magic. Those with white life force could be similar to the Panthera Protector or Joker. Aya and Eve possess the ability to use Overdive, where they send their consciousness inside of someone else. This is similar in nature to Shuyin using Fireflies to possess others, or Jenova invading the minds of those bearing her cells, though Overdive has no such cellular condition. Hyde is said to have obtained Aya's Overdive ability by being hit with one of her Overdive kills, perhaps indicating that the High Ones have the capacity to steal techniques like Lavos and Jenova. However, in consequence of this, his consciousness is gradually being overwritten. The intel doesn't clarify what is overriding his mind, but one would assume that it's being consumed by Aya's fractured soul through the Twisted. In this way, Aya herself is likened to a spiritual parasite like Jenova. She enters the inner world of his psyche, where they wage battle with the force of their will. The effect when Aya uses Overdive is near identical to that scene when Cloud sends his own mind into the Lifestream to battle Sephiroth at the end of FF7. Although the High Ones and the Twisted are deemed to be distinct species, they are shown capable of hybridizing. When Aya dives into these hybrids, she finds herself in a strange realm together with the soul of the original person. This could be likened to the Far Plane or the Sea of Marco. It is stated that life exists after death. The energy leaking out of this Far Plane-like location takes the form of a red life stream, further cementing the theory that Earth might have an Animus life stream if we were to secretly unite the franchises. In the realm of Time Zero, we also see red Fireflies whose segmented construction heavily resembles the Gis in the Lake of Blood. The Babel core has a crystalline roof that resembles the Gis cavern. There are some coral-like growths deep into the Babel's interior which I also felt resemble things from Jenova Dreamweaver's Arena and the Village of the Gi. Reapers can also make use of this red energy to summon what the game terms blood walls. And I did mention prior that there are blood-like bubbles that visually occupy a similar role to spirit energy. Considering the Gi's Animus reservoir is named the Lake of Blood, perhaps that's deliberately applied to make a hidden link between these two properties. Gi entities frequently use their red lifestream as a barrier to lock the party in combat as well. Similar to the Gi empowering themselves with Animus, or Yu Yevon turning the Aeons berserk, this red energy can also supercharge Reapers and Rollers into what is called a manic state. The Reapers' boss music during this is a remix of that same track I previously cited as sounding like the Jaws music, which could be used to implicate Jenova due to FF7's own inspirations. Sin and the Heretic Mages of Final Fantasy X. Lavos is simply Lavos, and that's okay because Lavos is cool. But then the derivative creature which would come to be known as Jenova finds its beginning in the shattered soul of Aya Breya and her clone Eve Breya. Combining traits from the mutagenic neo-mitochondrial creatures, the infectious Twisted and High Ones with their refined mimicry into a singular entity. From here, I have previously suggested that Jenova would go on to invade planet Terra and also planet Spira. My theory would be that she selected Unalesca, perhaps because she best fit the desired role of Divine Mother, or perhaps because her appearance resonated with Shala and that Unalesca then delivered the virus to her father, transforming him into a spiritual parasite, and then took advantage of Spira's summoning system to create a cycle of sacrifice that would sustain the Jenova-adjacent entity they call Sin. Are there any other options for who that woman in the tank could be? What I mentioned were the safe possibilities for this woman's identity based off the characters, lore, and history of Gaia. If this lady is a pre-existing character waiting to be identified, then Jenova had either shifted into Lucrezia's face when she sensed Sephiroth's approach, or possibly defaulted to either her Minerva mimicry or Queen Shiva. From here, I have two comparatively more unsafe answers. My full-blown conspiracy framework stretches all the way to Square Enix's Parasite Eve, or rather to the third birthday which legally disassociates from that brand name, while the less out there reading pertains to the world of Spira. If you did want to look for an unconventional ID of her face, a lesser-known component to the setting is that FF10 occupies the same universe. It's been discussed in multiple Ultimanias and multiple interviews, the most recent only a year before FF7 Remake released, that the team consider FF10 and FF7 to secretly share a universe, or at least that it would make sense. Yuna's journey happens a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The interviewer references even earlier discussions from the Final Fantasy X scenario Ultimania, but I looked through it and couldn't find them. Instead, here's a translated excerpt from the Final Fantasy X Ultimania Omega. The interviewer asks, so 7 and 10 are connected? Nojima responds, well, there's not many specifics to it. I know that what becomes of people when they die is among them. You could say that it's basically the same. Both function along the same line of thought as I wrote the stories. Sometimes my thoughts just flow out like that, even though fireflies distinctly aren't green. The interviewer keys into this. When you speak of the dead becoming green, is it perhaps? Nojima answers, yes. In my mind, fireflies and Seven's lifestream are the same substance. That's right, there's something like the lifestream. Here Nojima draws attention to the similarities in their system of spirit energy as seen in the original FF10. In Final Fantasy X-2, the Albed genius named Shinra muses about possibly extracting farplane energy to create a city that never sleeps. Entrepreneur Rin is also pursuing this endeavor. The crux of this connection is when Shinra muses, farplane data, the more I study it, the more fascinating it gets. There's limitless energy swirling around in there, the life force that flows through our planet, I think. With a little work, we could probably extract the energy in a usable form. Rin, working alongside him, says, I am not alone in my thinking. We are researching ways to extract the vast energy that sleeps in Spira and use it to power Machina. Further interviews in the Final Fantasy X-2 Ultimania then solidify this into a more universal claim, where the descendants of the new character Shinra eventually head out to space, reach Gaia, and establish the Shinra Company. Nojima reveals, after quitting the Gullwings, Shinra received enormous financial support from Rin and began trying to use Vegnagun to siphon Mako energy from the farplane. But he is unable to complete the system for utilizing this energy in his generation, and in the future, when traveling to distant planets becomes possible, the Shinra Company is founded on another world, or something like that. That would happen about 1,000 years after this story, I think. Final Fantasy X-2 Last Mission continues this train of thought, with Riku mentioning that Shinra and Rin are still chugging along. Like FF7 being brought up in the FF10 Ultimanias, FF10-2's implications are also brought up in the Final Fantasy VII Ultimania Omega, stating, Shinra is a boy who supports the Gullwings, the group which the main protagonist Yuna belongs to. He carries a name that gives him an association to the Shinra company, and he is researching a method that could utilize the energy of the life force that flows through our planet. The results of this cannot be seen in FF10-2, but maybe one day his descendants will establish a company that supplies the energy of the planet. This world has something similar to the live stream that is worthy of attention. A 2017 interview on YouTube sees Katase reconfirming the connection. There is a character in FF10 called Shinra. The scenario writer suggests that he might have something to do with the Shinra company in FF7. Lastly, in the Inside Final Fantasy X and X-2 video on YouTube, Kitase again highlights Shinra's Farplane research being a secret history for the setting of Final Fantasy VII. I am obligated to mention that in a 2018 convention interview, Nojima did laughingly suggest it wasn't intended to be taken seriously, but this is the single denial in an absolute sea of agreeances. There are remarks from Kitase after that still in favor of the theory, and frankly, I'd just rather discount that one claim since A, it's more interesting from a discussion perspective, and B, there's far too much intention to the mechanical and historical overlap hidden in the actual content of 10 and 7. It's interesting he would say that in 2018 when 2020's FF7 Remake and then 2024's FF7 Rebirth would do so much to stabilize the link between them. Regardless of what stance you take, humor me for a bit. Fireflies are the spirit energy wisps of Spiro. While they predominantly appear as individual wisps, we do see places like Zanarkand where they coalesce into a proper stream. The far plane is its afterlife space like the life stream. Just as it's possible for Cloud and Tifa to be physically immersed in the life stream despite that technically constituting the afterlife, so too can Yuna physically step into the far plane. On Gaia, there's the ocean and the ocean floor, then below the ocean floor is another chasm containing the core life stream reservoir and the souls of those departed or unborn. I commonly refer to this as the Sea of Marco, a term originating within Maiden Who Travels the Planet, which looks at Aerith's experience moving through that plane in the second half of FF7's story. While the content of that short story isn't explicitly canon, I still consider the terminology to be useful for discussion. Rebirth may have quietly validated it, as the Gi's red lifestream reservoir is named the Lake of Blood. When Cloud and Tifa fall into this deep section of the stream, we see that their memories interact with the spirit energy to reconstruct visualizations of the past, similar to the images produced by fireflies in Spira's Farplane. From within the Farplane, Nuge asks Yuna to take care of things topside, suggesting that the Farplane is located deep within the planet, similar to the Sea of Marco. When Spirans pass away, their souls float as orbs. Sephiroth, Kadaj, and Grimoire disperse in much the same manner when absorbed into the lifestream. The Farplane furnaces found within Vegnagun's sanctum may have been that which would eventually develop into the concepts for Marco reactors and Midgar. The Final Fantasy X-2 Ultimania once again comments on this, mentioning that its layout was a deliberate nod to Midgar. And so maybe I should also point out the similarity in the helmets of the YK T63 and Shinra grunts. The FF7 Remake games do actually further this connection by showing us an Owlbed founder in the Shinra Museum and having Aerith perform multiple sendings. By putting her emotions into singing and dancing her No Promises to Keep ballad, she's able to appease the lingering spirits of Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie, and she dances again when trying to quiet the labyrinth of the lifestream. The swirling of her staff in the ladder particularly resembles Yuna's routine, and during this we see firefly-like orbs. Fireflies are plastered all throughout the compilation really. You see those distinct orbs in Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core, Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, Rebirth, and Ever Crisis. Another scene within the labyrinth reveals that in lifestream-dense areas, dead bodies may transform into fiends, just as is so signature to FF10. I've said it a million times by now. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a unified Final Fantasy VII. They're pulling in everything they possibly can to make the most complete Final Fantasy VII compendium. Not just through the abundant interweaving with compilation characters and history, but also through stuff like upping the John Carpenter-esque imagery in Jenova's gore and shapeshifting, layering the spacetime in a way that strengthens the stylistic link FF7 has always shared with Xenogears and Chrono Trigger, or in this case, yes, putting in these little background elements that galvanize its bond with Final Fantasy X. The unexplained mechanical control scheme for the Omega weapons seen in Dirge of Cerberus may be a machina of similar construction to Vegnagun. Dirge of Cerberus additionally hints that Cid's new airship, the Shera, was actually an archaeological discovery built by an unknown people. This claim is reiterated in the Final Fantasy VII 10th Anniversary Ultimania. He didn't build it himself, he just uncovered and restored it. This may indicate it to be of Spiran design. Its external construction heavily resembles the Albed's ships, while on the inside the Shera and the Fahrenheit have remarkably similar cockpit designs. Spheres are pretty obvious analogues to materia as well. Auron does explain that water and fireflies mix to create crystalline orbs that contain the memories and experiences of deceased people, functionally akin to materia as a life-stream crystallization encasing the thoughts and memories of the ancients. Spheres predominantly have cultural uses. There are the Besaid spheres, Kilika spheres, Josei spheres, Macalania spheres, and Bevel spheres that activate mechanisms in their respective cloisters, as well as glyph spheres and destruction spheres for further uses. Dress spheres enable transformations that carry unique skills. Treasure spheres contain rare information. Core spheres are utilized for the Sphere Break competitive puzzle game. Shinra's comm spheres work like video calls. The most common are definitely the movie spheres though, which take place of camcorders in the setting. While it has only happened a single time that I can recall, Dirge of Cerberus did show Lucrezia recording a message for Vincent within a materia. There are also several specialized types of movie spheres seen in 10.2. Save spheres are a canonical entity in the setting that heal their users, since we see Braska and Jecht interacting with one. The dress spheres and their techniques probably count too, but the only enemy I've directly managed to witness using a sphere to charge any kind of magical attack is Spira's Omega weapon. Spheres are more of a daily commodity, rather than the rare treasures from the planet to enable magic spells like materia. This could just be a case of necessity though, since Spirans seemingly have innate magical potential while Gaia's humans don't, so the former has no need of materia-like spheres. Jenova Emergent's eye somewhat resembles that of the shark, which Unalesca's beckoning transforms into in 10.2. That's not really Unalesca though, just her Firefly manifestation, and that becomes a generic enemy encountered further down the cloister, so it's nothing significant, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. Sin itself is heavily in line with Jenova. It's an undying creature that preys upon the spirit energy of the world's inhabitants. Getting too close to Sin exposes people to a toxin that affects their minds, somewhat similar in nature to Jenova's virus. It has mutagenic properties that can transform human souls into fiends, or cause its own spawn to distort and merge, much like Jenova's own mutagen. Jecht is considered to be no longer human after his mutation. Waka warns that Sin spawn have to be deftly culled, for Sin will always return to collect them. Cellular reunion, if you will. Sin exists as a physical dream manifestation. Remake's Jenova achieves much of its trickery through dreams and illusions that alter physical reality. Both also heavily depend on purple void magic. And in fact, by referencing concept art and using FreeCam, we can observe the Remake trilogy's Jenova Life Clinger has a long mouth running down its neck that makes it heavily resemble Sin. Just lots of overlaps at lots of points. That's why it's worth acknowledging that Unalesca is actually the one who matches Rebirth Jenova's facial features most clearly. You know, I feel like I'm having to make some compromises in order to claim that Jenova's design here matches to Lucrezia or Minerva. Both those suggestions are carried in large part by their narrative implications. But just in terms of visuals, Unalesca is genuinely a dead ringer. Where does this Unalesca Jenova idea even originate from? FF10 has always kind of been known to parallel FF7. Its fireflies are a lot like the Lifestream in both appearance and mechanics, and the imagery of its main villain Seymour lines up to Sephiroth at points. He's this megalomaniac religious zealot who transforms into strange monsters, and the disturbing way in which he treats Anima as his mother is reminiscent of Sephiroth's relationship to Jenova. Hear me out? Bizarroject and Safer Seymour. Just as you could consider Angeal Penance and Genesis Avatar to be their equivalents of the Jenova-fueled Bizarro Sephiroth transformation, Braska's final Aeon has the exact same design structure. It even has wings. Seymour Flux and Seymour Natus heavily resemble Bizarro Sephiroth and Safer Sephiroth too. Seymour's theme sounds a lot like FF7 tracks such as Anxiety or Trail of Blood. Perhaps Sin Spawn and Jenova's spawn should be considered as much the same, and that could be interpreted as the reason why FF7 Remake is now also predominantly calling its enemies fiends instead of monsters. These parallels only heightened when we learn that they do in fact happen under the same universal mechanics. Placing FF10 and FF7 in the same universe rose to prominence not as fan theory, but as something repeated by the actual staff that worked on both games. Therefore, people have long noticed that Unalesca shapeshifts, controls her silver hair similar to how we find Jenova's hair all wild at Nibelheim, and has distinctly Jenova-like skulls on her tentacles. In fact, FF7's Jenova didn't especially look like this. It's Remake's version that had its face changed to where it now resembles Unalesca, not the other way around. And this is the same of the redesigned lady at Mount Nibel. Unalesca even has red fiery spirit energy like the Gi tribe. Additionally, Jenova's children, the remnants of Sephiroth, summon Bahamut Sin, who very clearly is modelled on the entity from Spira. Now Rebirth has made them look closer than ever before, near identical, dare I say. Aesthetically then, there is a lot tying Jenova to Unalesca. Did her soul fall into such rancor after FF10 that the passing of millennia eventually turned her into the cosmic scourge Jenova? Had Jenova descended upon Spira and infected Yevon and Unalesca to begin with? These angles are both well worth consideration, at least in concept, given how Unalesca has red spirit aura while Jenova, the Gi tribe and Lucrezia can all fundamentally be considered unsent. Many of Jenova's attacks are a form of dream that alters physical reality, which is basically the way that Spira's Aeons exist. Unalesca is perpetuating a cycle of sacrifice and considers it foolish to try fighting against sorrow. Once it becomes clear that the party will not fall in line, she begins to speak like a distant entity, calling Una a poor creature. This could be because Unalesca was actually a foreign existence harvesting their sorrow, and ultimately trying to manipulate them into keeping Sin alive. Jenova's manifestations too are perpetuated through the sacrifice of black-robed individuals, and she seemingly preys upon spite and sorrow. Much like how Jenova has been presented as a creature existing in two main parts, a lady and a beast, Unalesca might also be part of Sin's hive mind. So, reiterating, if we want to connect Unalesca and Jenova because of this, then we have to decide which is the cause and which is the effect. Unalesca as the original cancer that would eventually distort into the eldritch evil Jenova doesn't work. The only things really in favour of it are that Final Fantasy X nebulously predates FF7 by at least 1,000 years, possibly more, that Jenova now heavily resembles Unalesca, and that Shuyin's immense hatred preserves his soul as a kind of spiritual parasite, body snatching and shape-shifting just as is Jenova's forte. Shuyin cites Nuja's weak mental state as the reason for him being easily overtaken, similar to Angeal's implications about his mental fortitude letting him resist Jenova in Evercrisis. Shuyin's spirit takes over Baralai, then shapeshifts back into Shuyin's form. When he releases this transformation, Fireflies float off his body. The Albed believe that within the Farplane, Fireflies interact with people's memories to summon images of the deceased, so maybe Shuyin was abusing the same principle. Jenova is also known to peer into her victims' minds in order to select her form, and remake content has really pushed this angle of Jenova being an illusionist. Once again, Fireflies are a component of Spira's lifestream, so maybe Unalesca also gained this shape-shifting power, and that explains her transformative nature as Jenova. Final Fantasy X will kinda open the gate for a lot of entities to be beckoned back from the Farplane, even that on the level of sin. And unlike before, where they seemed to just be images dictated by the mind of the beckoner, these new illusions had actual sapience. Consider that Yuna is strangely out of character here, returning to the role of priest for the Yevoners, and one time using the word reunion. Maybe Unalesca secretly imitated Yuna as a step toward Jenova. Unalesca never gets sent because she simply dies as a fiend instead. My understanding of Spira's mechanisms is that after this she simply goes to the Farplane as any other soul would. She technically does reappear in Final Fantasy X too, but my reading is that it's a beckoned image rather than her genuine unsent soul. Her image is manifested inside the Via Infinito cloister when Tremor changes its spiritual composition to resemble the Farplane. However, that preachy woman yet speaks absolutely no lines, and she transforms into a generic basilisk fiend. Thus I do not believe it's the real deal. But if the soul was able to be beckoned by Fireflies like that, then it means her spirit has entered the Farplane, the boundaries of which deteriorate across 10-2 and beyond. It would be child's play for her to return. So if you wanted Unalesca as the origin point, then maybe you could go, Unalesca, the heretical summoner princess of Zanarkand, performs blasphemous magic on her father and turns him into the malign deity Yu-Yevon. Yu-Yevon creates sin. The three establish a spiral of sacrifice to keep feeding new spiritual energy into their eternal lives. 1,000 years later, Yuna defeats Unalesca, Sin, and Yu-Yevon. Tidus vanishes alongside Dream Zanarkand. 2 years later, the Farplane begins destabilizing due to Vegnagun rampaging within its heart. The founder of New Yevon, Tremor, beckons Unalesca and Xeon inside the Via Infinito complex, alongside other Yevonite elites. With the Farplane increasingly unstable, the dead and the dreamed begin wandering back to the surface. The first to arrive is Tidus, in response to Yuna's strong feelings, but something about his body still feels strange, weaker, less grounded somehow. 6 months later, Yuna discovers an ancient tower, from where we can see purple haze beginning to surround the moon. Tremor is once again within its walls, since 10-2 mentioned that when he became head of New Yevon, he kept all the spheres of lost history to himself. While Unalesca's presence is not stated, perhaps we could read this as indication that he was helping her supercharge into something that could exceed Spira. A year later, Yuna has taken on a role as the High Priest of Yevon. Her personality is almost unrecognizable from the spunky yet caring girl she previously was. She herself finds this odd, but strangest of all is the faint relief she seems to express when ascending is interrupted. The Farplane is near entirely destabilized. Sin is beckoned back to Spira with ease. Other lost souls return to the surface as well, still comprised of Fireflies, but seeming to express genuine self-determination this time. The dead have begun walking. At this point we might surmise that maybe Unalesca's soul has reached through the Farplane and possessed Yuna to reinstate Yevon and revive Sin. From there, she might find a way to fuse all factors into a single shape-shifting, mind-reading, spirit-eating parasite, then chuck herself up at that moon to absorb its void energy and send herself out into space like a meteor, henceforth known as Jenova. It's not a very happy story, but currently that's what I think would be the way if you wanted to establish a tie between Unalesca and Jenova, with the former as the origin point. But yeah, it's not a very happy story. In order to suggest that Unalesca became Jenova, it's kind of a prerequisite for her to have also destroyed Spira before departing to space. But I don't like that idea since it betrays the sanctity of the FF10 IP. If Unalesca were the start point, you would probably also have to position it where Genovalesca either attached herself to or followed Shinra's spaceship, meaning that they landed together. But I have severe doubts on the timing of that. Shinra's reason for wanting to explore new worlds was to create an industry using the planet's spirit energy, so I find it hard to imagine that it took them millennia to establish their Mako Empire if they had landed 2,000 years ago with Jenova. It's unknown exactly how old FF7's Shinra company is, but Mako energy was discovered in 1959. It's doubtful that it would take a technologically advanced spacefaring species nearly 2 millennia to finally extract Mako when they were directly seeking it out, so the Spirans must not have landed together with Jenova, which greatly lessens the probability that she was originally Unalesca. Anyway, that's impossible because of the Gi tribe, who can be evidenced as suffering Jenova's mutations anywhere from many millennia to an eternity ago, well before the events of Final Fantasy X. If Jenova were the source though, that I can get behind. The original contact would surely be Unalesca, and then the infection spread to Yevon. If we follow this symbolism, then there are a pretty decent amount of overlaps to be found. Both forms of Jenova are newly redesigned to resemble Unalesca. The woman matches her face, while the monster matches her skulls. Approaching Unalesca causes a static effect to appear on the screen, which has also been part of Jenova's presentation. Knowing that FF10 and FF7 share a universe, remake Jenova's new association to purple and red hazes, or a focus on emotions such as pain and sorrow do hark back to FF10 and Unalesca's boss battle. Murals associated with her have symbols resembling the Yevonite script. Loveless G Edition's story of war-torn Guardia could be likened to the tale of Unalesca and Zaon in the Machina city of Zanarkand. Jenova commands reality-altering dreams, Sin has a reunion instinct. Gi Natak laments an endless dream, and Remake's original announcement trailer that many attribute to him also references a long calm. Gi's spectres can send their red spirit orbs to possess Gaian life forms, akin to Yevon possessing the Aeons. This causes them to develop red spheres somewhere on their body, similar to the Gi possession turning the Gaian creature's spirit energy red. In Ever Crisis, the spirits of the Gi appear as these strange ghostly beasts which loosely resemble Yevon. You could toy with the idea that maybe the Gi's stone effigies are actually the same mechanism as the Faith, and that perhaps Jenova is their collective final Aeon. Like Spira's Faith display physical features of their Aeon forms, maybe those Gi mutations all combine into Jenova. While not all of those points are agreeable and it might not unequivocally hold up to scrutiny, placing Spira and its sinister Yevon religion as a past example of Jenova's conquest is pretty nice actually. Can I comment more on Unalesca as Jenova's contact? Yevon and Unalesca are referred to as the heretic mages of Zanarkand in Aeon no Daisho, while Unalesca herself is also dubbed both the Sorceress and Summoner Princess. Yevon is branded heretical in the Machina War because his side is trying to conquer Bavel in order to instate his own religion. Unalesca somehow becoming Jenova doesn't really work mechanically or in terms of the necessary timeline for arrival on Gaia, so I would sooner say that Jenova might have been the one who corrupted the Spiran Church into the manipulative, mutagenic cesspool that it was. Side note, as hinted at above, not only did I replay the entire FF10 saga to get 4K screenshots for this discussion, I even read those dreaded novellas. And honestly, not nearly worth the vile reaction they got from the fandom. If I can address the three main misconceptions. 1. Yuna and Tidus do not break up in the story. Their relationship hits some turbulence on account of the fact that they only ever spent several weeks together, then Yuna is without him for the next 2 years. This makes Tidus self-conscious about his place in Spira and in Yuna's life, which I think is fine. If you look at On the Way to a Smile, for example, it's fairly common for the Final Fantasy book characterization to be a little more nuanced and vulnerable compared to the action-packed games. Tidus is a pretty moody character throughout FF10 to begin with because of his abandonment issues. I think it's just easy for people to forget because of his strong, sassy moments. He's a lot like Zack Fair in that regard. People generally just remember Zack the puppy, excitable, snarky, friendly, confident. But he is such a jaded man by the end of Crisis Core. In fact, it has been stated that Tidus was the model that the team looked to for Zack's personality. They don't break up in Will either. Yuna still calls him her boyfriend there. She pretends to have another lover because she's jealous of a girl called Marfi that Tidus is close friends with, but they don't actually emotionally detach from each other and move on. But when she says that she's no longer looking at Tidus, that it's someone he doesn't know, and Lulu then urges Tidus to just figure it out already, I assume that it's because Tidus is the one who has changed to where Yuna's not sure if she recognizes him as the same person anymore. 2. Yes, Tidus does, get exploded by a bomb and have his head land near Yuna. That one is real, unfortunately. Though, to be fair, it isn't exactly stated that he was decapitated so much as his body disappeared, and that distinction is important here. But he didn't think it was a blitzball and excitedly go to kick it like a slapstick scene, which is the explanation that gets memed around. He just doesn't really see it coming in a forest path. It's definitely jumping the shark and probably the worst way that they could have handled this. But the purpose of this scene is to inspire questioning about the nature of Tidus's current existence, because he can be restored from this state. Is he flesh and blood? Is he still a dream? Is he an unsent or something else? This continues into FF10 Will, where Yuna is noted to be kind of relieved when she sees Ascending interrupted. 3. No, for the love of God, Yuna does not join some debauched sex ritual. I cannot believe this claim perpetuated and wonder how one could have possibly misinterpreted the text so badly. Aon no Daisho's chapters detail 2 time periods. Tidus and Yuna's storyline picks up immediately after 10-2, while the other half follows a group of summoners and guardians during the Machina War a millennia ago. It's honestly very fascinating because it looks into the lost history of Spira's original divine pantheon, before the heretical mage Yu Yevon bids them taboo and establishes his religion. But anyway, this section provides further details into the way a faith and then an aeon is made. In that era, before Yevon had restricted the teachings, a summoner could take someone that they had some kind of strong bond with and turn them into an aeon core, which is what they called faith. It's mentioned that there are several methods for which to transform an aeon core. The bond could be that of family or of kin. But one method, which the summoner Ifanal utilizes, is through sexual ceremony. Tidus and Yuna eventually encounter Ifanal as an unsent in Dream Besaid, a Firefly recreation of the island during the Machina War. And because they've gone back 1,000 years, Yuna begins to suspect that there may still be a faith in the temple that she could contract an aeon with. They track Ifanal down. He explains some of the lost history about how summoners could once create new aeons instead of just using the preordained ones as Yevonites do, and mentally communicates to her his own sexual methodology. He himself is ashamed that this was the only version of the contract that he mastered. He's not accosting her. Yuna does not sexually engage him either. She would not do such a thing because she does value herself and does love Tidus. And narratively, she isn't trying to create a faith, but just idly considered if there might still be a chance to obtain an aeon that would aid them in escaping the otherworld. That's all. No Final Fantasy X NTR sex cult. Sorry, haters. Since Spirans and Gaians both physically align to Earthlings, could it be possible that the Gi also originally had Earth-like skin tones, heights, and ears, and what traits we're seeing in the current Gi are their late-stage form after full species-wide Jenova assimilation? That's certainly possible, but there's no way to prove that without a flashback to the heydays of Terra. Excluding the abhorrent effigies, thus far we've seen 2 Gi body types. perhaps representing either different stages of mutation or the physical differences of two separate races from different countries on their planet. Gi-Natak is a blue-skinned giant, and the temple suggests that there were others like him. The Gi-Spectres, meanwhile, have a desaturated blue tone and are far shorter than Gi-Natak. We see in the murals that these two types coexisted during life. The spectral bodies do lack heads inside of their mantles. Instead, a ghostly orb sits there when they activate. But as you may expect, that does appear to be a trait unique to their spirit forms, as other murals have depicted them with masks. The skin of the reunion cultists increasingly becomes a sickly grey. Then a jab of Jenova cells has shown them swapping to shades of blue and purple in their mutation. There's a whole range of blue-grey skin observed across the Entities, Marconoids, Twin Brains, and Diabolic series. It's not guaranteed to continue deepening into a colour like the Gi though, since further mutation of the cyan Diabolic creation transforms it into the red Diabolic variant. And Hojo's skin first turns green before mutating into the purple heretic form and then the tan lifeform Hojo N. And bringing up FF10 again, there is an unsent priest close to Unalesca whose skin has turned green. Tremor also uses that model. But yeah, again, who knows? This isn't something we could decide upon through speculation. We would simply just have to be presented with the visual and see that they either are or aren't. We don't have the necessary information to confirm either direction, though I personally just prefer to think that their original form is that of distinctly non-human giants. What spirit energy colours do we see on Spira? From what I can discern, Spira's lifestream on the base level is green. We see plenty of green motes throughout FF10. Nojima describes the dead becoming green as one similarity between 7 and 10, and Chuami in FF10 Will identifies the Moonflow's green orbs as spiritual energy. These green fireflies then give off an iridescent glow when interacting with the farplane, either from permutation, beckoning, or sending. Many of the cursed enemies in 10.2 seem to give off fireflies that are a solid blue, but I'm not sure if this is to indicate anything specific, as some of these do still faintly turn green before fading out. It could just be an effect of the iridescent filter interacting with the shadowy underground lighting. However, a blue stream does appear in the sky above the Macalania Spring, and similarly blue-tinted fireflies are shown streaming throughout space during Seymour's presentation. There are what look to be just a small few pink fireflies that appear when Yojimbo is summoned, and we glimpse a few more during 10.2, though they still remain a rarity. Negative fireflies have been seen alongside the unsent, such as Jiskel or when activating the towers in Vegnagun's Sanctum. And of course, Unalesca and Yu Yevon have vibrant red spirit energy, which distills into red spheres on the bodies of possessed Aeons. Do those circle symbols in the Jenova and Meteor murals suggest that Spirans might have been the ones to colonize Gaia and evolve into the Cetra? No. Aside from the symbols and the sending, the only other part of Cetran culture that even loosely resembles Spirans is the loveless storyline and its epic of the mechanical city Guardia, which can be claimed to resemble the tale of Unalesca and Xeon in long-lost Zanarkand. But I don't buy Guardia literally being Zanarkand. Based on an overlap in appearance, the goddess of Guardia most likely was Jenova, who landed on Gaia 2,000 years ago. The time of Zanarkand is 1,000 years prior to FF10, then they reach Gaia 1,000 years after FF10 too. But Cetran society stretches far beyond a mere 2 millennia, so it's impossible for Spirans to have become the Cetra. Any relics of Spiran culture that might be found throughout the land are either from Shinra's company, such as the Shera airship, or possibly introduced as a result of Yu Yevon hypothetically being part of Jenova's hive mind. Is Jenova the Omega weapon from planet Spira? Oh-ho-ho, this one is fascinating. So, Final Fantasy X does have a creature known as the Omega weapon, plus its lesser counterpart, the Ultima weapon. But unlike Gaia or Terra, where the weapon is an environmental lifeform naturally developed by the planet, The Omega weapon known on Spira is the result of a sacrilegious scholar named Omega embracing the power of anger to achieve a terrible form. His hatred was so great that he therefore became the greatest of fiends. Omega arose 300 years after Yevon and Unalesca's insurgency. Omega Weapon's Fiend Tale says, "Analysis failed, Fiend has no life readings. Omega Weapon, the king of the Fiend world. His soul is shrouded in darkness, I can't see anything. So much hate swirling around in there, it has to be expunged or else." While it does seem at first glance that the FF10 weapon is incompatible with the FF7 weapon lifeforms considering he was just a guy, this may not actually be the case. Scanning the Omega weapon in 10.2 acknowledges the growing presence of other weapons as a classification, such as the Ultima weapon, Nemesis, and Paragon. Omega Weapon's scan says, "Once the most powerful of all fiends. With the coming of more formidable weapons, it has relinquished that title, but it remains a mighty adversary nonetheless." Paragon's scan says, "The strongest fiend of all time. According to the little data available, it has the power to rend the heavens and sunder the earth." Conversely, we actually know little about the origin and makeup of FF7's weapons. All we really know is that the planet produced them in order to combat Jenova. They could be created by using a Cetran spirit as the basis, we don't know. However, there are hints of something hidden within this Omega weapon. For starters, I've mentioned how important the purple haze, red haze, or purple and red haze is to remake Jenova's presentation. This wasn't part of the original FF7, but was glimpsed in Final Fantasy X, and exclusively on the fiends which possess a potential link to Jenova. Unalesca has red spirit aura and fades away into a purple and red haze. Yevon is empowered with red energy, and of interest here, this Omega weapon is hidden within a purple haze at first. So that's odd and deliberately appropriated by Remake. Furthermore, Jenova in her murals appears with a 7-pointed crown strikingly similar in structure to that Omega weapon's 5-pointed crown. And Jenova Lifeklinger has a strange blue orb in its chest, perhaps a Magnus materia crystallized through her absorption of the lifestream in the ancient capital, but we could also place it as the same blue sphere that Spira's Omega weapon has in its chest. Lifeklinger emits magic beams from this orb. Omega is the only entity across FF10 and FF10-2 that I managed to find using its sphere for magic blasts. Omega Weapon's signature move is Nova, the animation of which is clearly referencing Sephiroth's Supernova and then heavily inspires the Dissidia version of Supernova. Then you tack on the other things I've mentioned, such as the Unalesca-like Jenova redesigns, Yevonite-like symbols in the Jenova-relevant murals, Jenova's new dream powers, or how Lifeklinger's gigantic mouth does quite resemble Sin. And it can lead you to question if maybe Jenova is the result of Spira's Omega weapon, who was left undefeated by the party and secretly became further mutated by Unalesca and Sin's lingering spirit energy over time. We see dark aeons persisting even after Yevon's defeat, so it would be possible for such a thing to escalate post-FF10. Final Fantasy X-2 Last Mission shows the moon with a purple haze around it that wasn't visible in either of the main games, and the Ultima weapon, which is the lesser half of the Omega weapon, having developed a red core where it was once blue. With all this together, perhaps a presence in the moon further mutated the Omega and Ultima weapons and gave them access to a supernova-like limit break. Maybe the groundwork for an eventual FF7 rewrite that created some level of link between Jenova and Spira had been put in place all the way back here, neatly wrapping it up with that one wing on the title screen serving as the bow. After all, the goddess Lucera isn't described until 2013's novella, but can be mysteriously spotted all the way back in 2004's Final Mission. Spira does also have a superboss named Penance, and I've repeatedly brought up the Geese god having some connection to the Angeal Penance face. Once again though, I don't think Jenova could have come here from Spira, because I don't believe the timeframe supports the Gi being Spirans, nor will I accept that Spira has been destroyed, which is a prerequisite in order for Jenova to have directly been that Omega weapon. And why would the Terran Gi tribe be calling to this Unalesca Sin Omega mutant from Spira? Makes no sense. Importantly, Omega's reason for mutating into the Omega weapon was actually because he hated Yevon so immensely, which should be the theoretical source of Jenova's scourge on Spira. Lifeklinger definitely has a lot going on in comparison to FF10, but we still have at least 2 more transformations left in FF7 Remake's storyline, so there's no reason that this should be indication of its original form. If anything, I would probably stick with what I mentioned prior, where I suggested that the Yevonite symbols in the mural might instead indicate that Jenova had been the original contact for Yevon and Unalesca's sinister religion. Maybe the reason that Jenova Lifeklinger has these nods to Spira's Unalesca, Sin, and Omega weapon are just because it retained their genetic codes once the Spirans finally managed to force it off of their world. Does Spira have an equivalent to Minerva and Loveless? Well, something like that at least. Yevon forced the world into monotheism and made knowledge of them strictly taboo, but there were old gods. The first hint toward pre-Xanacan culture comes from the Udisa Tower in Final Fantasy X-2 Last Mission, a mysterious, recently uncovered structure said to predate even the millennium-old Xanacant. One of the floors has a particularly interesting statue of some Valkyrie. When I saw this, I thought it's so strange, because it's not a faith, it'd be sacrilegious to Yevon, and they did suggest this tower actually predates Yevon. So then what is it? I need to know. To my excitement, AN no Daisho did actually pick up this plot thread. That idol is most likely Lucera, the goddess of war. This hotly debated little novella looks into the lost history of the Machina War and the pre-Yevon pantheon. Those named in the book are Lucera, the goddess of war, Sloan, the god of vengeance, Ifanal, the god of beauty, Kush, the goddess of abundance, Alb, the god of workers, Amli, the god of travelers, Vam, the god of order, Kanila, the goddess of the moon, Mayo, the god of the sun, and Gard, the protector of the farplane, as well as Mika, Gecko, and Romand, whose denominations are not specified. Briar tells that Spira has been governed by these supernatural beings since its inception. During the Machina War, summoners and guardians would adopt the titles of the gods, in some way perpetuating their legend loosely like Loveless. If we have to relate this back to FF7, Lucera is a pretty obvious pick to be their equivalent to Minerva or the goddess of Guardia that mimics Minerva. Lucera might also have a mechanical halo at her back, similar to Minerva, but it's unclear if that's part of the model or simply a part of the building. A similar shape to this appears as a floating glyph in the final boss arena and as some ancient planetarium on the tower's roof. This is activated by a control panel that resembles the goddess materia slots in Benora, and in that case, maybe the cracked orb in the middle might signify some kind of large crash on Spira in the days before Xanacant. A meteorite? Yeah, that one's a reach. I'm just thinking out loud. If Jenova had any contact with Spira, I don't actually think she would have taken the form of goddess Lucera. Nothing of Spira's political or religious history has any reason to lean that way. Unalesca is a far more suitable candidate for a contact, and the novella's revelations about her seducing a large number of warriors to attack Bavel and its old gods is a much more apt comparison to Loveless. But I do find it interesting that Jenova copies Minerva, who resembles Lucera, and then goes on to govern the city of Guardia, which has a similar name to Gard. Learning about the Spiran divinities has definitely got me thinking more about the different stances on Saturn worship that Bugenhagen and Guy Natak describe. Maybe they too had a whole pantheon now lost to history, and warrior goddess Minerva is simply the only surviving legend. One wing from Lucera's statue appears on the title screen of the game. Though the tower has 80 floors, the final intended floor is actually the 77th. if you proceed to 78 or 79, you have to be sent back to 77 and let the founder warp you to the final boss at floor 80. While waiting for him to appear on floor 77, the dialogue box questions, why did the founder choose this floor? Mayhaps a cheeky nod to the number 7, Any other notes about Final Fantasy X before moving on? Scholar Mayhen inadvertently describes Dream Zanarkand using the phrase Otherworld. This phrase is used again in An no Daisho. The repetition this then shares with Jecht's theme, also named Otherworld, might be enough to adopt it as a proper terminology that he was read up on. There might then be some overlap here with the subworlds in Final Fantasy VII Remake, which are also described as dreams existing within the lifestream. Might these too be other worlds created by the spirits of the Cetra acting as something akin to faith? Food for thought. Is Spira the country, the continent, or the planet? I should think that it's the name of the planet in FF10. Characters have been heard using phrases like peace on Spira or why on Spira, where Spira is clearly substituted in place of Earth. Pain has silver hair and adopts the Sephiroth stance, but this has no significant meaning. FF10's Shinra achieves a mutation named Almighty Shinra when he absorbs the Omega Weapon's Fireflies, which essentially is what Hojo wanted to achieve by merging with Gaia's Omega Weapon. And lastly, I'll just very clearly restate my answer to be that if Jenova and Unalesca are linked in any way, it should be because Jenova secretly invaded Zanarkand, not because Unalesca evolved into Jenova. Do any of the other Final Fantasy entries share a universe? The Ivalice Alliance games are all part of a single world history. Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age and its sequel Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings are set in the distant past. Final Fantasy Tactics A2 also features FF12 characters, so should be placed after Revenant Wings. Millennia pass by, and in that time a post-apocalyptic event occurs. Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance take place on the other side of this calamity, with only secretive records that hint toward FF12's original period of technological prosperity. There is also something to be said for FF13 and Type 0, the two main games that exist under the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythos. I don't really want to get too deep into it because it's just throwing off-topic spoilers at you, but I think you could connect them. The short of it would be that Bunavelza tasks Pulse with locating Etro's gate, and he delegates that further to the fal'Cie of Type 0. I've also seen at least a few people crafting crazy conspiracies about FF8 being a distant sequel to FF3, though I have not read into it to understand the how or why. And I know that there are some who believe that the creator from Final Fantasy IV The After Years seeding crystals to other planets implies that he's responsible for the worlds of at least Final Fantasy 1 to 5. But this still wouldn't actually suggest that those first 5 entries exist in the same universe, because Final Fantasy V mentions that its crystals were birthed within the interdimensional rift. For the most part, Final Fantasy is structured as a multiverse, where each setting is walled from each other by a massive conceptual domain that has been referred to as the interdimensional rift, and perhaps even the edge of creation, but more commonly called the void. Plenty of final bosses such as Chaos, the Cloud of Darkness, Zeromus, or Ultima have breached into that higher realm. And there are extreme entities such as Shinryu, Omega, and the gods Chaos, Cosmos, Materia, and Spiritus who largely reside within. The Void is how crossovers like Dissidia or World of Final Fantasy are permitted to exist. But those generally involve characters and locations being pulled into the Void. The only characters who have ever really crossed the whole way through to other settings are Gilgamesh, who recurs in many entries as a dimension-hopping character, and Cloud, who was summoned into Final Fantasy Tactics. The only one point of confusion springing to mind is that Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, which features contact with other universes similar to the Dissidia series, distinctly lists World 7 and World 10 as separate instances being connected to. For this though, I'm just willing to call that either an oversight or a compromise, since trying to work in some fine print about them technically sharing a space-time would be more confusing than it's worth. We can easily just say that the Lufenian report logs were honed in on the specific planets without necessarily addressing the entire, broader, differing universes, and so maintain that they simply didn't mention Spira and Gaia's shared universe. Deus of Xenogears. I'd just like to see Chrono, the compilation of Final Fantasy VII and the Xeno series talking to each other through references and imagery, considering how deeply tied they all are. This is something I've rambled about so much. And that's why, at least on a theory crafting level, I like the idea of connecting them all through their conspiratorial alien gods. Xenogears is probably the hardest to make fit since the existence of the Perfect Works lore Bible means we do know a lot more specific information regarding where Deus came from and how it works than Lavos, Jenova, or Sin. It's a man-made interplanetary bioweapon system. But I'm content to say that, well, maybe that research began when they discovered a fragment of Lavos somewhere out in the universe, like the Frozen Flame. The Frozen Flame does end up producing another grey titan similar to Deus, after all. Or maybe Lavos itself is an errant intergalactic bioweapon like Deus, which would then be why when the Kingdom of Zeal's researchers are trying to harness Lavos' energy, they inevitably create control systems like the Black Omen and Mammon Machine that are analogous to the Eldritch and Zohar. The Frozen Flame and Zohar are both sacred energy artifacts with prominent eyes. I will say, the way that FF7's original North Cave crumbled and deteriorated does look odd, in the sense that it almost looks like a building breaking down, similar to the Eldritch in Xenogears that becomes Babel Tower. Not only does FF7 Rebirth now have these Animus men, but in addition, it's actually also made Jenova seem more like an artificial bioweapon than ever, with the laser blast that Lifeklinger shoots from her wings. These look less like magic blasts and more like spaceship lasers. It's even got an aiming light and rapid fire mode. At this stage, I am genuinely pretty serious in treating Jenova as a fragment of Lavos until explicitly proven otherwise. But in this way, you could perhaps also legitimately implicate her as a Deus-type bioweapon too. Deus is called the Mother God. Jenova is the Revenant Mother. The imagery of the mother landing to the surface inside of the Persona Molecular Assembly Plant's central pod is pretty important to her. I did mention much earlier that there is in fact the possibility to create conspiracy where Jenova may also have actually landed in a pod ejected from a crashing spaceship rather than a meteor. There's a type of reunion in Xenogears where the anima relics unknowingly influenced the Omnigears to congregate at Deus's altar, and the mutated blood of the wells calls them to a singular location so that they can merge together and become Deus's fleshly body. We know that Deus is biomechanical because it's an artificial life form in a symbiotic existence with the Zohar engine and Kadamoni supercomputer. Lavos becomes increasingly biomechanical as you cut through its layers too, with the core resembling an astronaut accompanied by 2 drones. And while they're probably just magic blasts, Jenova Lifeklinger does kinda look like it's shooting out spaceship laser beams. They have an aiming light and even a machine gun mode. Lifeform Hojo N's model is rudimentary due to not appearing in Remake yet, but his design does give me Lavos vibes in its color scheme and dome head too. Conceptually, I would think Chrono Trigger and its iconography to be the origin of all the other offshoots though, and the ending of Xenogears demands it being put at the end point of any given timeline. So Lavos, then the Time Devourer, then Jenova, then Sin, then Deus. Obviously, that wasn't a perfect arranging of things, it was almost all hypotheticals after all. I do think that there are grounds to connect Chrono Trigger to Jenova and FF10 to FF7. I enjoy the idea of folding Parasite Eve into the mix, and entertaining any link to Xenogears is more of a thought experiment than anything. People don't take well to the idea of even FF10 being connected to FF7, let alone Chrono Trigger or Xenogears, and especially not the third birthday, since it seems nary a positive review of that even exists. People don't even like Final Fantasy VII to be connected to Final Fantasy VII. This I know. But I think people get too heated over the idea because they just don't seem to realize that it doesn't matter. Connecting FF10 to FF7 might explain or address one or two niche livestream mechanics and an equally minimal amount of background imagery. Nobody's saying you need to play one to understand the other, or that they share any important continuous plot at all. It's just a little bit of extra fluff context that further situates the way their worlds work. There's no significant story connection between them, so neither game is especially bothered by that link. But it's just loosely, broadly canon that, someone from Shinra's lineage established the Shinra Company, and that, Fireflies are livestream ether. It's not that big of a deal. Rather, the intertextual connection that will make me enemies is when I say that I'm, somewhat serious in considering that the new universe Lightning creates at the end of 13.3 could be the one containing Spira, Terra, and Gaia, since it shows something that's pretty undeniably the livestream spreading throughout the cosmos. The way they redesigned Sephiroth's god form in Dissidia NT heavily resembles Boon of Elza, and there are unexplained god machines like the Omega Weapon's internal control interface that we could easily dub Fal C. The Final Fantasy XIII Reminiscence epilogue novella illustrates that certain aspects of the old universe still faintly remained in the memories of cast members. For new people on new planets, they might not have access to those sensations, but perhaps elements of the old gods had some loose influence on the development of the new cosmology. Maybe you could draw a line from FF13's universal chaos energy previously governed by the goddess of death Etro and wielded by warrior Caius as a purple flame, to Jenova, and then returning to FF7's chaos. But that's a discussion for another day. I am finally done here. I've strayed pretty far from Cosmo Canyon at this point, basically just stitching together several other small blog posts I had drafted or published. In any case, this has been fun. I love free camera tools and how they allow us to really pore over environmental details or abstract symbolics with a much keener eye. When I first managed to set up the FreeCam mod in the Xenoblade trilogy, I lost countless hours inside of it. I'm sure I've probably spent a whole playthrough's worth of time in Xenoblade 2 just snooping around in FreeCam for optimal discussion screenshots. A full playthrough of that, mind you, being between 60 and 80 hours. The fact that FF7 Rebirth's PC port is compatible with the amazing Unreal Engine 4 unlocker right out the gate was such a blessing for it. I've had so much fun taking the camera around to focus on things the game doesn't particularly want me to. In conjunction with that, I think that my FreeCam experience permitting me to put together a piece such as this helps to visualize one key part of why I love the FF7 Remake game so much. The expanded lore implications found in every conversation throughout every location. If a game lets me make collages about it, that's a sign of quality. When I made that Numa video, it was my first exposure to FreeCam. That script was a little different than usual because it focused less on interpretation and more on using this mod to provide clear screenshots of details which were obfuscated during cutscenes, then further substantiating my suggestions with artbook scans. It was so much fun. The desire to take this one scene of Rex and rotate it just a little in order to more clearly see the design of that sword kicked off this whole new obsession. FreeCam has totally rewired how I approach my screenshot selection in Discourse, stepping back into these worlds as a more active participant in the game space to sneak up close and engage in something along the lines of digital news photography. Being able to do that kind of fun activity in the world of Final Fantasy VII is unreal. I've never played Pokemon Snap or anything similar, but these days I kinda get the appeal of that concept. Photo mode really is a whole other side to a video game experience which allows you to engage with it in a totally different way. To be able to have these investigations into the imagery and history of the Final Fantasy VII setting at a level in league to the Xeno games is phenomenal, and so perfectly catered to me as an FF7 fan. I'm putting some things together in my mind, completely at a loss with others, writing one blog, then leaving it as a draft to write another instead because I've remembered one line of dialogue or stumbled upon a couple of screenshots illustrating a point to the opposite, and I am loving it. The history of Jenova, Chaos, and Calamity that we can find hidden away in a village below Cosmo Canyon may not be all that integral to the plot or to the trajectory of FF7 Remake moving forward. I'm not trying to, Epic Part 3 FF7 Remake theory, does the geese is aliens and black materia revealed? That's not me, and that's not the Gee. But the things which you can piece together about the past and how this may implicate the present is so fascinating to uncover. From Animus and Anima to the goddess of Guardia to Gee Nitark hidden in the Meteor mural, from Jenova to the Panthera Protector to Chaos. Deeper inquiries into the problematic historical timeline of Gast and Sephiroth, or making proper contextual continuity between the green geese souls in the Lake of Blood and Aerith's enigmatic sending ceremony. There are a lot of topics and imagery lines I was able to think about more deeply here, some finally addressing small inklings of something larger that had long been bugging me, others trending in directions I'd never have imagined before I started writing. While I may have just spent the last several hours contradicting myself and talking in circles as I go through my messy lines of thinking, I do feel like I have a clearer understanding of FF7's world now and its place in a potentially larger universe. Onward to Revelation.